Okay, I think we should start. Всем доброго времени суток. Спасибо большое, что присоединились к нам. Я очень рада объявить, что сегодня мы запускаем инициативу «Сана Блу» в поддержку школ, сообщества педагогов и родителей во время пандемии. Более подробную информацию о нашей инициативе вы можете найти на наших социальных сетях, Facebook, Instagram. И сегодня нашим первым гостем является доктор психологических наук Зухра Теджа. Зухра – эксперт международного уровня в области возрастной психологии, школьной психологии, а также в области социально-эмоционального обучения. С Зухрой мы познакомились ровно год назад на нашей международной конференции по социально-эмоциональному обучению в Нур-Султане и продолжаем работать вместе в проведении научных исследований в направлении психологии развития и школьной психологии. И мы сейчас перейдем на английский язык, а чуть позже, после эфира, для вас будет доступна видеозапись с переводом на казахский и русский языки. Zuhra, thank you so much for joining our initiative today. How are you feeling during these extraordinary times?
This certainly is extraordinary times, and I think in my lifetime, I have never seen or experienced anything like this at such a global scale, and it certainly feels like the world is coming together, and that is a positive outcome, that we're all coming together and fighting the same battle. So I'm sure that we'll all get through it.
Yeah, it's really uniting us all. And gives me a lot of hope. Yeah, and let's talk about the current situation in educational system in the world and locally in the US and Canada, and how the school system in the US and Canada are responding to this situation around COVID-19.
Mm-hmm. So I think, the way that the school systems run, and I can speak specifically for what's been happening in Canada, but generally, even in North America, we have sort of a federal system. So there's a federal response, that's the national response. And then nested within the federal response, there's a provincial response. And in the case of the United States, there would be a state response. And then nested within the provincial response in Canada, we have school district response. And then nested within that is the school itself. And so there's going to be certainly some variability in the way that each of the schools respond according to their own particular system, while also keeping in mind that there are certainly guidelines across a larger system that each of the schools need to do.
Yes.
Sorry, say that again.
Is it more decentralized?
Yes, there is both a centralized system and then there's a decentralized system as well. Within the province, for example, if I were to speak about the province of British Columbia, there are a set of guidelines that we are using that are really important for us to for all school districts to really abide by. The first sort of priority for us is really ensuring the health and safety of the children and the families and the educators. That is really first and foremost. The second piece, the second guideline is to really think about the children and families of our frontline workers. Those are all the healthcare workers that are really fighting the fight and ensuring everybody's health and safety. And so those children need to be supported during the time in which their parents and family members are at the front lines supporting and really taking charge of this pandemic. The third guideline is really looking at those children and families who are in need of specialized support. And there are so many different kinds of children and families who are in need of that specialized support. We think of, there's an example of thinking about the area of food security. Many of these children come to school and require a meal at lunchtime because their families simply could not afford it. Well, now these children are at home and their family still cannot afford it. So what is it that the school systems can do in order to support that, delivering the meals for children, providing coupons for families so that they can actually get a meal. So these kinds of special, unique circumstances or special circumstances that need to be considered. And then finally, the fourth guideline is really thinking about providing continuity of education for all children so that they're not losing so much time from their learning. And that is a response that is very specific to British Columbia. I'm sure that it does not differ too much for the other provinces. And these are all the needs that, however, in British Columbia, these are the guidelines that have been set out.
Let's talk about remote learning now. You've touched upon this in your answer. So one of the leading scholars in education change, Michael Fallon, he recently wrote in his Twitter, "My best advice is do not run toward a solution. The urgency is COVID-19. Think anew about education, focus on those that need help, while all of us take 2020 to create a better system." And in this regard, what do you think about the idea of sudden transition toward remote learning in many countries around the world?
I think the way that I would encourage us to sort of think about remote learning is thinking about how can we use remote learning in order to support children, and the question of whether or not remote learning is appropriate in all contexts. Of course, there are children, there are families that do not have access to computers, many of those who are in rural areas. And so what are the...
Kazakhstan.
Yeah, in Kazakhstan as well, there are?
Yeah.
Yes. And so what we want to think about is what are some alternatives to remote learning that we might like to consider. I think what needs to happen first is consider our goals for learning. And if we can identify what the goals are for learning, then we can think about, okay, how can remote learning support in the achievement of these goals? And is remote learning accessible for children to achieve these goals? There are, in Kazakhstan, as well as in places in Canada, communities and children who do not have access to online learning platforms. So there are several things that are happening. I mean, one of the things is that there are children and families who are being given computers or laptops in order to borrow them. These are obviously belong to the school, but schools are no longer in session in the sense that children are not physically going on site to schools to learn. And so there are laptops and there are computers available that can then be used at home, and children and families are able to borrow these. And then when they start to go to school again, then they need to obviously return those laptops and computers. In other communities that are more rural, where maybe that is simply not a choice, I have seen teachers who have traveled 2 to 3 hours. They was actually showing that on the news just yesterday, of teachers who were traveling for 2 to 3 hours and providing educational materials to children and families who were living so remotely and didn't have access to computers. And so the goals are still the same of learning, but the way in which children are accessing learning and instructional tools is different, where some are using online and some are not, but both are able to achieve the same goals. So I think it's really important for us to, yes, definitely, we have been thrown into this online learning cosmos, right? And everybody around the world is using so many different platforms and learning so quickly how to use them. But it's important for us first to really understand what are our goals, and then think about how these online learning tools can be used in order to support these educational goals. So for Kazakhstan, for your Ministry of Education, what are the goals for education that are outlined by them? And then thinking about, okay, these are the goals. How is it that we can best support children to achieve these goals?
That's great. Thank you, Zahra. And one more question. It's about our psychological health, mental health, how we ensure emotional well-being of educators, parents, students during the distance learning, during remote learning, and in general during such challenging times. I know that parents all over maybe world, that yes, but in Kazakhstan specifically, because we started remote learning this Monday, parents are in such big stress. So that would be very helpful to hear some recommendations, suggestions from you as an expert in psychology.
So there are a couple of things that I would say. The first thing I would say is, whatever parents, teachers, children, families generally are feeling, the nice thing is that there are millions of people, billions of people around the world who are feeling the same thing right now. This is a very, very unusual time that we find ourselves in. The person next door is feeling and experiencing exactly the same thing. And I think it's important for us to, first of all, acknowledge that we're not alone. So when parents, children, families do feel that things are overwhelming, the demands are too high, I'm a parent, now I have to play teacher, I'm a teacher in my classroom, I've never used technology, now I have to learn how to use it. All of these anxieties, all of these stressors are things that, whether you live in Kazakhstan or you live in Canada or the US or anywhere else in the world, everyone is experiencing that same thing. And I think it's, first of all, really important to acknowledge that. The second thing I would say is it's really important when it comes to emotional well-being. There's so much information that is being thrown at us. And it's often quite difficult to be able to differentiate what information is healthy and important information to know, and what information is unhealthy or too much. And I think drawing parameters around what it is that you take in, what information you absorb, how much information you absorb, I think is very, very important, because it's so easy. It's to consume so much that you end up having sleepless nights. you're no longer enjoying the time with your children and your families, which in many ways, this is such a wonderful opportunity to really connect emotionally and physically with your children, with your own children who live in your home. And so really keeping that perspective of drawing parameters and creating routines. And those parameters and routines will help to be able to alleviate a lot of that stress. And drawing parameters around what exactly you are choosing to look at and absorb. That
And
is
maybe you could give us a specific example of such parameters.
okay. So let's say, for example, you are. It's important, first of all, to understand, the facts and the information about COVID-19, so we can see how far we're progressing in finding, in finding the cure, in understanding what how the rules and regulations around social distancing or physical distancing. It's important to have that information and to say, okay, the routine today, because this information is important to learn and to be aware of, this is going to happen. I'm going to sit with my family and absorb and watch this particular program for 30 minutes or 45 minutes per day, and that's it. And the rest of the day, I'm just going to switch off. If you think about a course of a day, not much changes between the morning and the afternoon. The numbers don't suddenly shoot up. The changes in rules and regulations don't change within a day. There is no reason to be consumed by that information repetitively over and over. So choose your time and then discuss that information with your children at a level that is developmentally appropriate. So if you have high school children, right, you will have more sophisticated conversations about it, but limit those conversations. And then the rest of the day is spent creating other routines that are outside of the COVID-19. And then that way you have balance within your life and within your family. And that would be I think, a healthy recommendation for families.
Thank you, Zafra. And maybe in general, what recommendations and suggestions would you like to make for educators in Kazakhstan?
I think, in relation to online learning, and in relation to sort of, that anxiety of feeling that you are not connecting now, you don't have the opportunity to connect physically with your students, and that now your students are going to be losing out on learning, and I have to move more quickly now, and look at what other countries are doing. They've got online, learning happening, and we need to do that so quickly. Come on, let's get going. I would say the best place to start, and I think the most important place to start, is making a connection. And that does making a connection with your students. That could be through a phone call. It could be through email. It can be, as I was saying, there are teachers who are driving by children's homes and honking their horns and waving at them. They've got big signs on the sides of their buses, and the children are waving from the window. Any connection that you can make with your students, that would be the first place to start. The learning will come, but make the connection first and make the students feel like they're not alone, that you're still connected with them. Seeing teachers gives them a sense of normalcy in a world that is not normal right now. But knowing that my teachers still exist, I can't see them physically, I can't be with them physically, but they're there. I hear their voice. I see that bus, I see them online. And I think that would be one of the recommendations that I would make as first and foremost. And when checking in with your students, putting their health and safety and your concerns for their health and safety first. Find out how they are doing. Make sure that they are well. And if they're struggling, identify what are the resources that are in place. I'm sure that ministries of health, ministries of education are thinking about resources for the health and well-being and the learning of students. Take a look and think about what are the resources that are there and how can I access them and how can I best access them for these particular students who live in rural areas, these particular students who might live in urban areas, and really think about always think about the goals, think about the resources, and then plan accordingly. So those are the suggestions I would have. Make a connection. Think about the goals that your ministries have for students, and then think about how the resources that are available.
Okay, so our session is coming to an end. And on behalf of Sana, I would like to express gratitude for being with us today. And we greatly appreciate your insights. Those insights are very helpful for us. We'll share them with teachers, with parents in Kazakhstan, and we appreciate your wisdom. Please take care of yourself, be safe. And yeah, I will switch to Russian now. Наш вебинар подошел к концу, точнее, прямой эфир. Спасибо всем большое, что уделили свое время. Я надеюсь, что вы получили полезную информацию для себя. Берегите себя, своих близких, и всем прекрасного дня.